The purpose for which I wrote this book is to show that precisely by going through chaos and pain, we always have two options. We can either stay in it, or we can, through it, find both joy and victory, as well as answers to many questions. Today, there are many books as well as trainings and programs that talk about how to be happy, how to be joyful, how to find hope. But today, for example, if you mix it all together, then most of them are focused on you finding something good for yourself. Then the goal for which I wrote it was to show how to find joy through this. How, by going through the difficult circumstances of our lives, we can see that there is victory. Today, many people have access to information that tells them how to be happy and joyful, but people still ask questions. But I don't have that joy, I don't have that happiness. So what should I do then? And I would say its relevance lies in this. If we use a 100-point scale, I would say it's probably over 90. It is precisely through this that we open the way to both joy and happiness. That's why I approached it from this angle, to show the reality in which we live. But this reality, it gives birth to joy and happiness in our lives.
Pain, loss, chaos, this has been the state of humanity for millennia. In fact, it doesn't even depend on whether there is a war in the country or not. In fact, every person goes through stages of pain, stages of loss, stages of difficult problems and trials at some point. That's why I'm sure that this book will truly be relevant to any Ukrainian, whether they live in Ukraine now or abroad. The foundation of this book is based on several stories, such dramatic stories. How were they selected? What are these stories? Could you tell us a few stories about them?
Let's put it this way. The story of writing this book is very interesting, because the first step towards writing it was the idea to create a book that could be used to teach chaplains, practical psychologists, and counselors. But when I started writing it, I had the idea, why not write a book that anyone, regardless of their level of education, could pick up and understand that they can find hope here for themselves. The year 2022, despite the fact that war came to Ukraine, became a year when many people I worked with, served with, and knew discovered such life realities that I would say really shook me. And I think that was the very motivation for writing it. Let me tell you about a few of them. The book begins with quite a, I would say, horrifying story, perhaps about something we don't talk about or write about. I think there are many such problems in our society today. People simply don't talk about it. The story starts with the life of an acquaintance of mine whom I had known for more than 10 years. Her life story tells of a happy family, a Christian one, a family of church servants, a model for everyone. But for 10 years, she suffered sexual abuse from her father, who was a church leader. Everyone knew him as a very good man, a creative person, a preacher, a musician, an artist. And for all 10 years, he abused her, subjecting her to sexual violence. This story touched me so deeply, but I didn't just want to talk about her pain. What struck me was how she managed to get through it. It was a very difficult, I would say, life story, a complicated one. But that's exactly why I called the book Help Me Overcome This. Because those words came directly from her. In her suffering, in all the pain she endured, she said that every time she turned to God and spoke to Him. Who will help me overcome this? And it was this story that became the main one. From it, so to speak, all the other stories followed. And I would say that it was precisely from her story that the 10 steps to healing, to victory, were born, which I describe in this book. The uniqueness of this story lies in the fact that the family members, the mother, knew everything that was happening. But it's just that our human selfishness is so strong. What will others say about us? We, as if we are all such Christians, moderate, restrained, held her back from telling anyone. And here's an interesting moment, which I even describe here. There was a time when she wanted to be baptized in their church. There was a rule that before baptism, people would meet with the pastor and share some experiences from their old life. And her mother, she sat her down and said, she started telling her the story about Noah, about what his daughters did. They exposed his nakedness and what that led to. And with all this, she was simply manipulating her, telling her not to do it, because otherwise there would be a curse on her life. So she lived in such fear, in such despair, and at the same time in a Christian family that everyone admired, while in her heart and soul there were wounds, pain, and brokenness. And then just at one moment in 2022, she was already a mother, a wife with 2 children. Her husband didn't know about any of this. He knew her father, her family, but he didn't know what was going on with her. And then at one moment during a church service, something stirred her heart, and she realized that things couldn't go on like this. She had to put an end to it. And in this book, there is a lot said about both forgiveness and victory. I even raised the topic of what forgiveness really is. Because we often distort it. We say, well, how can we forgive those who are killing us? But we miss one detail. We don't ask for forgiveness for their sake. Forgiveness is an opportunity for peace for ourselves. Justice must, as they say, prevail. But we seek forgiveness for the sake of peace within ourselves. I would say this is one key story from which everything begins. And that's why the book is called Help Me Overcome This. Its purpose is to tell everyone, you have something that hurts. There is something in your life that weighs on you. Maybe your story isn't here, or maybe there are stories you've never experienced in your life. But each of them says that there is a way out, there is hope, and there is victory. Am I ready to accept and believe that there is a way out, there is hope, there is a path to healing? What other stories are told in this book? I would say when I had already finalized it as the last version, I browsed a bit through Instagram, various social studies, and this book touches on, I would say, the 10 most problematic areas that we encounter in our society. Domestic violence, bullying within the family, the issue of husband-wife relationships, the issue of parent-child relationships, infidelity in the family, the problem of war in Ukraine, issues related to manipulation, and the humiliation of people. That is, all those same painful, heated topics that we often don't talk about or write about, I have gathered here. I would say right here, there are many stories and each one raises some kind of issue. There's even an entire section here called Poison. Why did I name it that? Because this section is meant to address what is at the root and where these things come from. Emotional wounds, traumas, where does all of this come from? And here I list various things from which this enters our lives. What can hurt us? For example, chapter 4 talks about how, in practical terms, to go through this stage when you're in the midst of a storm, when you're feeling bad. I would say that every story in this book addresses exactly these problems that I mentioned. I even asked some of my friends who are involved in pastoral care and counseling to write some of the stories. So let's say its uniqueness is not just, for example, my own sort of objective experience, my perspective, but in order to strengthen it, I even asked some of my acquaintances who are professional pastoral caregivers to share a few of their own stories. This book contains an interesting story from one of my partners, an acquaintance with whom we work a lot in the field worldwide. He himself is Ukrainian, many international programs. He wrote an interesting story about his own brother. A year before the war, his brother passed the exam at a university in Chicago to become an anesthesiologist. He won a grant. He was on his way to fulfilling his dream. He simply had every chance to leave. When the war began, he gave all that up. And he went to the front as a doctor. He saved soldiers, he pulled them out under fire, he treated them. And while he was treating the wounded, a drone struck where he was and he was killed. And here his brother describes this remarkable story. He says, my family and I lived by this principle for a long time. Why? He could have gone to Chicago, he could have studied there, he would have had a grant, and he wouldn't have died. But then he writes an interesting thought. That's how we see it. But is it really so? We don't know. I think to some extent, our understanding is that our life is not under our control, but in God's hands. And no matter where you run, no matter where you hide, there are still things that will be with us. If not today, then tomorrow. I think this understanding of our identity, who I am, who God is, and that my life, no matter how hard I try to make it compact and comfortable, much of it does not depend on us. Why it doesn't depend on us? And I think that by understanding these principles, by holding on, I would say, to God to some extent, even the Bible, what does it tell us? Pray. Not so that all your problems will be solved immediately. As it is written in the Bible, pray and the peace of God will come into your life. I would say this is the very foundation, the starting point for everything. And I think to some extent it gives us the strength to live in Zaporizhia, to work, to serve, to help people. When they come in broken, it's hard for them to even say that everything will be okay. They look at me and say, Pastor, what are you taking? They ask, why are you always so positive? But we don't take anything. We simply entrust our lives to God. And what I want to say, which is interesting, is that throughout all these years of war, not a single member of our church has been harmed. No one's windows have been blown out, no one's house has been bombed, and no one has been injured. There's even a story here about one of our ministers, Mike Kita, who was a soldier. As an officer, he served on the front lines and was wounded so badly that they wanted to amputate his leg and arm. He kept everything. Nothing was amputated. It was simply a miracle, just such a miracle. Even the chief doctor who treated him, who had come specially from Kiev, was amazed. And we spoke with him in the corridor. He knows I'm a pastor, and he said, you know, God exists. Because, he said, if the bullet had gone just 2 centimeters further, it would have hit his heart. If he had bandaged his leg incorrectly, he would have lost it. So he made me realize once again that our lives are not under our control. As David says, the valley of the shadow of death, each of us will go through it. We can't live our lives in such a way that we never go through the valley of the shadow of death. And people who live with such positivity, thinking it doesn't apply to them, that's not true. We will all be in it, and we will all have to go through it. But there's an important point, and I write about this too. You can get stuck in it, stay there, or you can make it through. It all depends on what we focus on, who supports me, who I hold on to, and how I move forward. And so to some extent, all these moments, they help us live in Zaporizhia, trust God, pray, and serve. Now I see that we are meant to be there. Maybe another time will come, and we will clearly understand that we need to leave, and we will go. For now, I understand that this is God's will, and we are there.